Hello everyone, welcome to this podcast. Today we will see the book was Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Lolita is a 1955 novel written by Russian-American novelist Vladimir Nabokov. The novel is notable for its controversial subject, the protagonist and unreliable narrator, a middle-aged literature professor under the pseudonym Humbert Humbert, is obsessed with a 12-year-old girl, Dolores Hayes, whom he kidnaps and sexually abuses after becoming her stepfather. And Quat, Lolita and Quat, the Spanish nickname for Dolores, is what he calls her privately. The novel was originally written in English and first published in Paris in 1955 by Olympia Press. The novel has been twice adapted into film, first by Stanley Kubrick in 1962, and later by Adrian Lyne in 1997. It has also been adapted several times for the stage, and has been the subject of 2 operas, 2 ballets, and an acclaimed, but commercially unsuccessful, Broadway musical. It has been included in many lists of best books, such as Time's list of the 100 best novels, Le Monde's 100 books of the century, Böckklubben World Library, Modern Library's 100 best novels, and The Big Read. Plot: the novel is prefaced by a fictitious foreword by one John Ray Jr., an editor of psychology books. Ray states that he is presenting a memoir written by a man using the pseudonym and quote, Humbert. Humbert and Quat, who had recently died of heart disease while awaiting a murder trial in jail. The memoir, which addresses the audience as his jury, begins with Humbert's birth in Paris in 1910 to an English mother and Swiss father. He spends his childhood on the French Riviera, where he falls in love with his friend, Annabelle Lee. This youthful and physically unfulfilled love is interrupted by Annabelle's premature death from typhus, which causes Humbert to become sexually obsessed with a specific type of girl, aged 9 to 14, whom he refers to as and quote, nymphets and quote. After graduation, Humbert works as a teacher of French literature and begins editing an academic literary textbook, making passing references to repeated stays in mental institutions at this time. Before the outbreak of World War II, Humbert emigrates to America. In 1947, he moves to Ramsdale, a small town in New England, where he can calmly continue working on his book. The house that he intends to live in is destroyed in a fire. In his search for a new home, he meets the widow Charlotte Hayes, who is looking for a tenant. Humbert visits Charlotte's residence out of politeness and initially intends to decline her offer. However, Charlotte leads Humbert to her garden, where her 12-year-old daughter Dolores, also variably known as Dolly, Lo, and Lola, is sunbathing. Humbert sees in Dolores the perfect nymphet, the embodiment of his old love Annabelle, and quickly decides to move in. The impassioned Humbert constantly searches for discreet forms of fulfilling his sexual urges, usually via the smallest physical contact with Dolores. When she is sent to summer camp, Humbert receives a letter from Charlotte, who confesses her love for him and gives him an ultimatum. He is to either marry her or move out immediately. Initially terrified, Humbert then begins to see the charm in the situation of being Dolores' stepfather, and so marries Charlotte for instrumental reasons. Charlotte later discovers his diary, in which she learns of his desire for her daughter, and the disgust he feels towards Charlotte. Shocked and humiliated, Charlotte decides to flee and writes letters addressed to her friends warning him of Humbert. Disbelieving his false assurance, that the diary is only a sketch for a future novel, Charlotte runs out of the house to send the letters but is hit and killed by a swerving car. Humbert destroys the letters and retrieves Dolores from camp, claiming that her mother has fallen seriously ill and has been hospitalized. He then takes her to a high-end hotel that Charlotte had earlier recommended. Humbert knows he will feel guilty having sex with Dolores while she is conscious, so tricks her into taking a sedative by saying it is a vitamin. As he waits for the pill to take effect, he wanders through the hotel and meets a mysterious man who seems to be aware of Humbert's plan for Dolores. Humbert excuses himself from the conversation and returns to the hotel room. There, he discovers that he had been fobbed with a milder drug, as Dolores is merely drowsy and wakes up frequently, drifting in and out of sleep. He dares not initiate sexual contact with her that night. In the morning, Dolores reveals to Humbert that she engaged in sexual activity with an older boy at a different camp a year previously. A sexual relationship begins between the two when Lolita seduces Humbert. After leaving the hotel, Humbert reveals to Dolores that her mother is dead. The news is devastating to Lolita, and she cries often in the coming days. The two travel across the country, driving all day and staying in motels. Humbert desperately tries to maintain Dolores' interest in travel, and himself, and increasingly bribes her in exchange for sexual favors. They finally settle in Beardsley, a small New England town. Humbert adopts the role of Dolores' father and enrolls her in a local private school for girls. Humbert jealously and strictly controls all of Dolores' social gatherings, and forbids her from dating and attending parties. It is only at the instigation of the school headmaster, who regards Humbert as a strict and conservative European parent, that he agrees to Dolores' participation in the school play, the title of which is the same as the hotel in which Humbert met the mysterious man. The day before the premiere of the performance, Dolores runs out of the house following an argument with Humbert. He chases after her and finds her in a nearby drug store drinking an ice cream soda. She then tells him she wants to leave town for another road trip. Humbert is initially delighted, but as they travel, he becomes increasingly suspicious. He feels that he is being followed by someone Dolores is familiar with. The man following him is Claire Quilty, a famous playwright who wrote the play that Dolores was to participate in. In the Colorado mountains, Dolores falls ill. Humbert checks her into a local hospital, from where she is discharged one night by her and Quat, uncle and Quat. Humbert knows she has no living relatives, and he immediately embarks on a frantic search to find Dolores and her abductor, but initially fails. For the next 2 years, Humbert barely sustains himself in a moderately functional relationship with a young alcoholic named Rita. Deeply depressed, Humbert unexpectedly receives a letter from a 17-year-old Dolores, telling him that she is married, pregnant, and in desperate need of money. Humbert, armed with a pistol, tracks down her address against her wishes. At Dolores' request, he pretends to be her estranged father and does not mention the details of their past relation to her husband, Richard. Dolores reveals to Humbert that Quilty took her from the hospital. She was in love with Quilty, but he rejected her when she refused to star in one of his pornographic films. Humbert claims to the reader that at this moment, he realized that he was in love with Dolores all along. Humbert implores her to leave with him, but she refuses. Accepting her decision, Humbert gives her the money she is owed from her inheritance. Humbert then goes to the drug-addled Quilty's mansion and shoots him several times. Shortly afterward, Humbert is arrested, and in his closing thoughts, he reaffirms his love for Dolores and asks for his memoir to be withheld from public release until after her death. Dolores dies in the childbirth of her baby on Christmas Day in 1952. Disappointing Humbert's prediction that Dolly Schiller will probably survive me by many years. Erotic motifs and controversy. Lolita is frequently described as an erotic novel not only by some critics but also in a standard reference work on literature, Facts on File, companion to the American short story. The Great Soviet Encyclopedia called Lolita an experiment in combining an erotic novel with an instructive novel of manners. The same description of the novel is found in Desmond Morris's reference work The Book of Ages. A survey of books for women's studies courses describes it as a tongue-in-cheek erotic novel. Books focused on the history of erotic literature such as Michael Perkins' The Secret Record, Modern Erotic Literature also so classify Lolita. More cautious classifications have included a novel with erotic motifs or one of a number of works of classical erotic literature and art, and to novels that contain elements of eroticism, such as Ulysses and Lady Chatterley's Lover. This classification has been disputed. Malcolm Bradbury writes at first famous as an erotic novel, Lolita soon won its way as a literary one, a late modernist distillation of the whole crucial mythology. Samuel Schumann says that Nabokov is a surrealist, linked to Gogol, Dostoevsky, and Kafka. Lolita is characterized by irony and sarcasm. It is not an erotic novel. Lance Olson writes, the first 13 chapters of the text, culminating with the oft-cited scene of Lo unwittingly stretching her legs across Humbert's excited lap, are the only chapters suggestive of the erotic. Nabokov himself observes in the novels afterward that a few readers were misled by the opening of the book, assuming this was going to be a lewd book, expecting the rising succession of erotic scenes. When these stopped, the readers stopped, too, and felt bored. Style and interpretation. The novel is narrated by Humbert, who riddles the narrative with word-play and his wry observations of American culture. The novel's flamboyant style is characterized by double entendres, multilingual puns, anagrams, and coinages such as nymphette, a word that has since had a life of its own and can be found in most dictionaries, and the lesser used faunlet and Most writers see Humbert as an unreliable narrator and credit Nabokov's powers as an ironist. For Richard Rorty, in his interpretation of Lolita in Contingency, Irony, and Solidarity, Humbert is an monster of incuriosity. Nabokov, who famously decried those he considered moralists, social satire, and novels with a direct political message, avoided providing any overt interpretations to his work. However, when prompted in a late-life interview with your sense of the immorality of the relationship between Humbert and Lolita is very strong. In Hollywood and New York, however, relationships are frequent between men of 40 and girls very little older than Lolita. They marry, to no particular public outrage, rather, public cooing, and quote, replied, and quote, no, it is not. My sense of the immorality of the Humbert-Lolita relationship that is strong. It is Humbert's sense. He cares. I do not. I do not give a damn for public morals, in America or elsewhere. And, anyway, cases of men in their 40s marrying girls in their teens or early 20s have no bearing on Lolita whatever. Humbert was fond of little girls, not simply young girls. Nymphets are girl children, not starlets and sex kittens. Lolita was 12, not 18, when Humbert met her. You may remember that by the time she is 14, he refers to her as his aging mistress. Nabokov later described Humbert as unquote, a vain and cruel wretch who manages to appear touching, unquote, in the same interview. When asked about coming up with Humbert's doubled name, he described it as unquote, a hateful name for a hateful person. It is also a kingly name, and I did need a royal vibration for Humbert the Fierce and Humbert the Humble. Unquote. Critics have further noted that, since the novel is a first-person narrative by Humbert, the novel gives very little information about what Lolita is like as a person, that in effect she has been silenced by not being the book's narrator. Nomi Tamir-Gez writes, unquote, not only is Lolita's voice silenced, her point of view, the way she sees the situation and feels about it, is rarely mentioned and can be only surmised by the reader, since it is Humbert who tells the story. Throughout most of the novel, the reader is absorbed in Humbert's feelings, unquote. Similarly, Micah Howe and Sarah Appleton Aguirre write that the novel silences and objectifies Lolita. Christine Clegg notes that this is a recurring theme in criticism of the novel in the 1990s. Actor Brian Cox, who played Humbert in a 2009 one-man stage monologue based on the novel, stated that the novel is, unquote, not about Lolita as a flesh and blood entity. It's Lolita as a memory, unquote. He concluded that a stage monologue would be truer to the book than any film could possibly be. Elizabeth Janeway, writing in the New York Times Book Review, holds, unquote, Humbert is every man who is driven by desire, wanting his Lolita so badly that it never occurs to him to consider her as a human being, or as anything but a dream figment made flesh, unquote. Clegg sees the novel's non-disclosure of Lolita's feelings as directly linked to the fact that her real name is Dolores, and only Humbert refers to her as Lolita. Humbert also states he has effectively, and quote, solipsized and quote, Lolita early in the novel. Eric LeMay writes, the human child, the one noticed by non-nymphomaniacs, answers to other names, and quote, Lo and quote, Lola and quote, Dolly and quote, and, least alluring of all, and quote, Dolores and quote, but in my arms, and quote, asserts Humbert, and quote, she was always Lolita, and quote, and in his arms or out, and quote, Lolita and quote, was always the creation of Humbert's craven self. The siren-like Humbert sings a song of himself, to himself, and titles that self and that song and quote, Lolita and quote, ... To transform Dolores into Lolita, to seal this sad adolescent within his musky self, Humbert must deny her humanity. In 2003, Iranian expatriate Azar Nafisi published the memoir Reading Lolita in Tehran about a covert women's reading group. In an NPR interview, Nafisi contrasts the sorrowful and seductive sides of Dolores, Lolita's character. She notes, and quote, "Because her name is not Lolita, her real name is Dolores, which, as you know, in Latin means dollar, so her real name is associated with sorrow and with anguish and with innocence, while Lolita becomes a sort of light-headed, seductive, and airy name. The Lolita of our novel is both of these at the same time, and in our culture here today we only associate it with one aspect of that little girl and the crassest interpretation of her." End quote. Following Nafisi's comments, the NPR interviewer, Madeline Brand, lists as embodiments of the latter side of Lolita and quote, "The Long Island Lolita, Britney Spears, the Olsen twins, and Sue Leon in Stanley Kubrick's Lolita." End quote. For Nafisi, the essence of the novel is Humbert's solipsism and his erasure of Lolita's independent identity. She writes, and quote, "Lolita was given to us as Humbert's creature. To reinvent her, Humbert must take from Lolita her own real history and replace it with his own. Yet she does have a past. Despite Humbert's attempts to orphan Lolita by robbing her of her history, that past is still given to us in glimpses." End quote. One of the novel's early champions, Lionel Trilling, warned in 1958 of the moral difficulty in interpreting a book with so eloquent and so self-deceived a narrator. End quote. "We find ourselves the more shocked when we realize that, in the course of reading the novel, we have come virtually to condone the violation it presents. We have been seduced into conniving in the violation, because we have permitted our fantasies to accept what we know to be revolting." End quote. In 1958, Dorothy Parker described the novel as, and quote, "the engrossing, anguished story of a man of taste and culture, who can love only little girls," end quote, and Lolita as, end quote, "a dreadful little creature, selfish, hard, vulgar, and foul-tempered," end quote. In 1959, novelist Robertson Davies wrote that the theme of Lolita is, end quote, "not the corruption of an innocent child by a cunning adult, but the exploitation of a weak adult by a corrupt child. This is no pretty theme, but it is one with which social workers, magistrates and psychiatrists are familiar." End quote. In his essay on Stalinism Cobber the Dread, Martin Amis proposes that Lolita is an elaborate metaphor for the totalitarianism that destroyed the Russia of Nabokov's childhood, though Nabokov states in his afterword that he, end quote, "detests symbols and allegories," end quote. Amos interprets it as a story of tyranny told from the point of view of the tyrant. End quote. Nabokov, in all his fiction, writes with incomparable penetration about delusion and coercion, about cruelty and lies, end quote. He says, end quote, "Even Lolita, especially Lolita, is a study in tyranny," end quote. The term, end quote, Lolita, end quote, has been assimilated into popular culture as a description of a young girl who is, end quote, precociously seductive, without connotations of victimization, end quote. Thank you for watching, keep supporting me. Like, share and subscribe, click the bell icon.